Voldemort is the most mysterious character in the Harry Potter series. The main villain became the main character of a bunch of theories and fanfiction, and therefore fan creativity does not leave him alone even 10 years after the 7th book was released. Today we decided to make a grand selection of the best theories about the Dark Lord. So, free up 20 minutes of your time and go on an exciting journey through the hypotheses and conjectures from the Harry Potter world. The first theory is quite obvious. The Dark Lord dies in a battle with Harry Potter, and all that remains after him is only a miserable shriveled body. It would seem as a victory, and one can celebrate. But some people will say, what kind of celebration there can be when we lost so many wonderful wizards? And others will remember the first fall of Voldemort. We will remind you. On October 31, 1981, almost the entire magical world was celebrating the disappearance of the tyrant into oblivion, but the joy turned out to be temporary. Perhaps we're facing the repeat of the story? Conditionally, if the Lord had only one Horcrux, then the chances of a second one to appear would not seem so high. But when it comes to 6, then the creation of one more Horcrux seems a bit more like a routine, and focusing on the beautiful number 7 from the Slughorn's memories does not make a lot of sense, because on the one side of the scale was immortality, and on the other, following the idea of the numbers, which is coming from the childhood fantasy. The Lord knew that there was a problem with Horcruxes. Also he knew that the last one of them was Nagini. Despite the fact that he couldn't check the diadem, he rather assumed that Harry and his friends had destroyed this Horcrux too. Therefore, the best thing he could do was to start creating new ones. We see how, during the Battle of Hogwarts, the Lord does not join the fight until he feels confident in his victory, and it's just then he comes out to the battlefield. All that time of absence he could compensate, for example, by making some kind of ritual. However, in both cases that we will see later on, the creation of Horcrux seems unreal. It seems that in the Shrieking Shack, while killing Snape, Voldemort did not reproduce any rituals, but simply left the premises. Perhaps he had some kind of plan for Harry Potter, such as trying to make a Horcrux out of the Elder Wand while finishing off the Chosen One. But it didn't work out properly. That could be the reason for the Elder Wand to buck. But anyway, we are not following Voldemort all the time, so we don't know. Perhaps he has a secret plan with a grain of sand at the bottom of the ocean. However, we remember that J.K. Rowling explicitly shows us in the book how the Dark Lord alternately remembers the Horcruxes one by one, and there is nothing unexpected. This is not a simple theory, but oddly enough, it lies on the surface, so let's go to its brother. Theory number 2 does not claim that Voldemort created additional Horcruxes, but does include the hypothesis that sooner or later he will return. By the way, now it's quite difficult to call such a fact a theory, since it had occurred in a certain form in the play Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. We're going to remind you that according to the plot, Voldemort's daughter, Delphine, is trying to create conditions for the return of her father. The main tool is the magic of a time turner. The girl, with the help of the sons of Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy, was changing the past, and several times she managed to create a reality where Voldemort won. It is clear that such variation of reality eventually did not become the final one, as well as the functioning of the time turner raised many questions. In the original story, the characters were returning to the past for a short time and, as it were, waited for the time point from where they started to travel. And that was their way to return back to the present. In variations of The Cursed Child, with the help of Time Turner, the characters were traveling back and forward across the time, and such a way of time traveling breaks a little bit the whole concept of the Time Turner. Despite the Time Turner and Horcruxes, there are other, less obvious ways of Voldemort's return. Remember that somewhere in the Forbidden Forest lies a lost resurrection stone. By the way, It was in the possession of Tom Riddle for some time, despite the fact that he didn't even know about it. So, there could be a person, let's say a descendant of the Dark Wizard, or a Death Eater who missed his lord a lot, who could start the archaeological excavations in the forest and find an artifact. However, the quality of the returned lord may raise some questions. As far as we know, the returned girl of the middle brother turned out to be just a miserable memory, as well as Harry's parents and their friends, who looked more like ghosts. Speaking of ghosts, by the way, this could be either a separate theory or a part of the whole Voldemort's return concept, but in a different form, which claims that the Dark Lord could become a ghost. Nearly Headless Nick, in a conversation with Harry, indicated that the main reason why he became a ghost was fear. Voldemort was afraid of death the most, so, following this idea, there might be a very simple solution. But then the question is whether the spirit of Voldemort, which was split for so many times, could leave a trace behind. There is a hypothesis which claims that the great fear and awareness of impending death makes the magician naturally to leave an imprint behind, something like a magical portrait. It retains the memory and some other features of the owner, but if we're talking about staying in the living world or going further, it is not a choice. Therefore, Voldemort, who did not have time to realize and accept the impending death, left nothing behind. Moreover, there isn't any mentioning in the Cursed Child about the noseless ghost somewhere in the Hogwarts. But still, there was a chance for this to happen. One could suspect that the ghost had flown away unseen. Nothing prevents the ghost from staying at Hogwarts and simply fly to a familiar basement, or, let's say, to head to Albania, the place where Voldemort already had managed to return once, and from even worse condition. But let's leave Voldemort's ghost here and move to the next theory. There is an opinion that Voldemort was an Obscurial. As far as we know, there were no the full concept of the Obscurials in the original Harry Potter story. However, after Fantastic Beasts was released, fans, using analogy with Credence, discovered an Obscurial in Ariana, and later on this fact was confirmed. Moreover, it turned out that the girl was an Aurelius aunt, but at that very moment another suggestion arose. Everything that is inherent for Credence's childhood is reminiscent of what happened in the Riddle's childhood as well. An unwanted child who grew up under severe restrictions, embittered, however, less downtrodden. After the first Fantastic Beasts movie, consideration of this hypothesis was denied, as it was argued by the fact that a child with such an illness does not live long and cannot reach the age of adolescence. But time was passing by, the second movie was released and then the third one, and we saw that Credence became a fully matured person, and his obscurus did not interfere with the living and even wasn't an obstacle for his improvement as a wizard. At the same time, his temper was getting increasingly worse. So, we had to get back to an old theory. It would explain the natural power of Voldemort. As we can see, the birth of rather extraordinary wizards is in the Dumbledore's nature. Albus is simply talented, Credence was hiding power in himself, and finally, Ariana, due to unfortunate life situation, obviously couldn't be longer a normally living and functioning person, but she still had an enormous power in her. We also know that in the Voldemort's family there were both great and obviously sick people. And we're talking not only about the Gaunts and Salazar, but also about the North American branch of the Dark Lord's relatives. His obscurus may look real, but then the question is, who helped him to cope with this disease? Could it be possible that Dumbledore, who knew Ariana closely and was acquainted with Aurelius, did not notice a familiar disease in Tom? Or maybe, on the contrary, he did see the disease and even helped Tom without even discussing this fact with the boy himself? There are many questions and very little answers. We can only hope that in the new movie the light will be shed on Voldemort's childhood. One more theory includes the interesting views not only on Voldemort but also on the other key characters. Of course, we are talking about a lovely concept which isn't accepted by many but is noted by J.K. Rowling herself. It is based on the tale of the three brothers. The only thing is that the prototypes of the Bard Beedle tale's characters are transferred to the modern times. Voldemort, who dreamed about the power, is compared with the older brother Antioch Peverell, the owner of the Elder Wand. The most similar to the middle brother Cadmus is Snape, heartbroken from the loss of his beloved one. And finally, the allusion to the younger brother is Harry Potter, the owner of the invisibility cloak, constantly eluding death. The most incredible thing is that the fans found a contender for the role of the Death itself as well. Of course, it was Albus Dumbledore, who, albeit not at the same time, possessed all three Hallows and from whom, one way or another, the three brothers could receive these Hallows. Voldemort took the wand from Albus' thumb. Snape was able to twirl the stone in his hands while he was trying to cure the curse on Dumbledore's hand. And finally, the headmaster of Hogwarts handed over the cloak to the Chosen One in his first year at Hogwarts. However, it is not entirely clear where this theory is leading us. Is it one more confirmation of the theory about the evil Dumbledore? Or is it an additional explanation of the reason why did Harry Potter survive in the Forbidden Forest? All in all, we're not getting any additional plot lines from such an interpretation. So, despite the fact that this theory even caused some hype in the fan community, it did not give any new explanations for the actions of the characters. The only thing that was noticed in the discussion on this topic was Harry's relatedness not only with Voldemort, but also with Severus. That is to say, the stone which was placed in the Gaunt's ring was passed at Voldemort at some point. Therefore, Gaunts were the descendants of the middle brother. And Harry, like all Potters of recent generations, must be a descendant of Ignatus Peverell, and it seems that we receive some indirect confirmation of this fact in the cemetery in the Godric's Hollow. However, not everything in this theory goes smoothly. According to the tale, it is unlikely that the two older brothers ever had children. The first one died almost immediately after receiving the artifact. The second one lasted a little longer. However, Cadmus' bride could hardly bring any offspring to him in the state she was. So, this theory fails at this point as well. There is one more theory where Albus Dumbledore plays an important role. The incredible assumption claiming that the headmaster of Hogwarts and the Dark Lord were related is being discussed on the internet. It doesn't really matter that they might be related not closer than fourth uncle and fourth nephew, as a foundation for such a theory is the ability of both of them to speak Parseltongue. Voldemort had this unique talent even for a wizard, since he was born. As a descendant of Slytherin, he knew how to speak with snakes even before he learned how to respond to the appeals of the caregivers in the orphanage. Dumbledore also understood the language of snakes and could certainly speak it. However, it is important to mention that he also knows how to speak with mere people. However, it does not make him a descendant of Poseidon. The headmaster had learned many languages during his long life and never stopped practicing them. That's a really great way to keep the mind sharp for a wizard who is over 100 years old. For those who say that it is impossible to learn the snake language, we will remind the event of the 7th book. There, Ron was able to enter the Chamber of Secrets simply by repeating the command "open" that he had heard from Harry some time ago. A couple attempts to hiss and it's done. It is unlikely that you will now seriously think that the relation between Dumbledore and the Dark Lord really exists. The fans certainly were not indifferent to Voldemort's family ties, so after all 7 books were released, many of them discussed the possibility of the existence of the Dark Lord's heir. There were many theories, as well as very logical refutations. After the Cursed Child has been released and the existence of Delphini was revealed, the whole situation has escalated significantly. Immediately, all the disputes and logical denials of Voldemort's possibility to have a child were recalled. However, all the arguments that already refuted this fact became a full-fledged theory by themselves. Voldemort cannot have children, and there are several reasons for this. The first and the most obvious theory concerns on a very important philosophical component of the whole Harry Potter story: love. Let's recall that according to Dumbledore, Voldemort is not able to love other person in any meaning of this word. The reason for this was the fact that Voldemort was conceived under a love potion, as well as his subsequent life in an orphanage, where the boy became embittered. Later on, all this became the reason for the Dark Lord to become alien to any manifestations of positive feelings for people, including any kind of attraction. Of course, even in such conditions, he could have conceived for himself some kind of an heir. But, for example, we can easily recall the way Voldemort dealt with his appreciated servant Severus without much regrets, and the fact that he is aiming to live forever. So, in this case, the heir seems more like not as an option, but as a threat, especially since Riddle himself remembers the fate of his father, who fell from his son's wand. As a result, we may assume that Voldemort has neither psychological nor rational need to have a child. Another theory implies not Voldemort's needs, but his possibilities. After the creation of Horcruxes and the ritual of rebirth, the Dark Lord had a completely different body, and there is no evidence that he slept, ate, or used the toilet. Most likely, his body worked differently. Moreover, during 14 years of wandering outside his body, Voldemort weaned from the usual human needs. In that period of time, as an exception, he was only consuming the unicorn blood and the gifts from Nagini. So, the question is, was it physiologically possible for Voldemort to produce a descendant? But after Delphi was born, the fans started to deny the theory that Voldemort lacks of physiological needs, exactly by the fact of the birth of Delphine. We are going to get back to Voldemort's children a little bit later, but for now, let's digress a bit to other theories. Everyone knows the fact that the older Blacks absolutely agreed with the views of the Dark Lord related to the blood purity. However, they were not in a hurry to join the ranks of Death Eaters, but some of their children gladly became the minions of the Dark Lord, including R.A.B., Regulus Arcturus Black. Telling the truth, the young Slytherin quickly became disillusioned by the methods that the Dark Lord appreciated the most. Young Black was especially outraged by the way his house elf creature was treated. At first, the Dark Lord took this little creature into the secret cave and made him drink the emerald potion, and then, after he put Horcrux into the empty cup and filled it again with the same liquid, he just left the cave, leaving the poor house elf to die alone. However, the elf managed to apparate home, return to his senses in the arms of his master Regulus, and tell him everything he saw. This way, young Black found out what was the real Voldemort's aim. He, leading by his house elf, went to the cave, drank the potion, changed the locket, and died there, allowing Inferi to drag him to the bottom of the lake. At the same time, Creature was forbidden to tell anybody anything that had happened. Regulus died in 1979. His father Orion died at the same year. However, there is no information about the circumstances of death of this man. There is a theory that Orion Black was killed by Voldemort. Perhaps the heartbroken father was trying to find out at least a little about the fate of his son. However, all these sentimental things were far from Dark Lord's understanding. Irritated by Black's insistence, the Dark Wizard ordered him to get out, but Orion refused to obey. So the Dark Lord simply moved him out of the way with a killing spell, at the same time showing his followers what happens if you're arguing with him. However, there could be a different development of the events. For example, Voldemort, who noticed the absence of Black, could order Bellatrix to deal with her cousin. So she went to her cousin's house, but found out only bewildered uncle and aunt, who themselves would like to know the truth. And after Bella returned with nothing, the Dark Lord could decide that the parents of the missing Death Eater might simply hide something, so he could visit them by himself. Pay attention, the Dark Wizard did not know that his Horcrux was stolen, so he couldn't avenge for this. After a conversation with the Blacks, the Lord said that Regulus was guilty, so he will be punished when he shows up. But for now, he has to understand that traitors are not welcome in the glorious Britain of the future that Voldemort is going to build. So he killed Orion, confident that the information about Father's death will reach Regulus soon and make him suffer. A few years ago, a completely crazy theory involving Horcruxes, Voldemort's mother and his favorite snake Nagini was discussed by the fans. A fan's assumption claims that earlier in her life, Nagini was Merope Gaunt. The arguments are following. Voldemort was born in 1926, and at the same time the circus where the Maledictus girl was performing came to Europe. She came up with the name Nagini by herself, after she was abandoned by Tom Riddle. Merope Nagini was pregnant, and therefore after returning to her homeland, she fled away from the circus. The money quickly ran out, so in order to survive, she even began to sell her family valuables. The girl understood that she was dooming her child not only to a beggarly existence, but also to a life with an accursed mother, who someday would finally turn into a snake. And therefore, she arranged her death in a shelter, so that her son would grow up in human conditions. By the time Tom was born, the girl was looking ugly, because the curse of Maledictus was distorting her features for more and more. Tom grew up, and Nagini Merope found him, told him everything she could, agreed to contain a piece of the wizard's soul, and became almost the Dark Lord's right hand, but of course in a form of snake. According to fans, an undeniable fact speaks in favor of this theory. Merope is the heiress of Slytherin. Who, if not her, should turn into a snake, and also the words expressed by the matron of the orphanage. I remember she told me, "I hope he looks like his papa." And I won't lie, she was right to hope it, because she was no beauty, and then she told me he was to be named Tom for his father, and Marvolo for her father. Yes, I know, funny name, isn't it? We wondered whether she came from the circus. There are way more things that goes against this theory. Firstly, Merope had never left the Isles and remained in Britain all the time. Secondly, she simply could not hide her pregnancy from the performers of the circus. It is unlikely that the management of the booth would be happy with the replenishment among their ranks. They, most likely, would help to solve the problem. And thirdly, we are well aware that Nagini is the same Nagini who supported Credence, who communicated with Dumbledore, and who was accepted into the magical society, and she would certainly have received help, needing it as much as Merope Gaunt needed. A very logical question raised immediately after the end of the fourth book. How did Voldemort get back his own wand, if after Avada Kedavra spell towards Harry Potter, he disincarnated and could not take away his wand? It seemed like this whole situation leads to a dead end. Both Hagrid and Sirius visited the crime place quite quickly, and for the Death Eaters, according to Bellatrix's behavior, things didn't look obvious. So, no one really knew where the wand had gone, although someone from the Ministry or Dumbledore's supporters should have picked it up. This contradiction reached J.K. Rowling's ears quite quickly. So, after she finished the final book, she revealed that Wormtail stole the wand and then gave it back to Voldemort. However, several questions arise at this point. Why would Pettigrew risk his life and go to the place of death of James and Lily Potter? He clearly knew that Sirius would try to settle the score with him. Such a courage does not correspond much to the type of Pettigrew. Another question is, has he really wanted to find out how it's all going to end up? Or maybe, like Severus, he wanted to get rid of James and make Lily to be his wife after Potter's death. The same question concerns the one's storage place. It is hard to believe that the artifact which belonged to Voldemort for 12 years was kept in the Weasley's house. As a result, explanation looks very unconvincing. So the question of how Voldemort got his wand with the phoenix feather back remains unanswered. The fact that the kinship of Harry's and Tom Riddle's wand in the future will become an insurmountable obstacle to Voldemort's attempt to kill the boy is adding fuel to the fire. We've got to the Voldemort's children. The release of the cursed child affected the fans' attitude not only to the childlessness of the Dark Lord, but to the Voldemort's heir as well. Let's recall the fact that according to the plot of this play, the Dark Lord and Bellatrix had a daughter. We can easily calculate her age and approximate place of birth. Bellatrix was released from the prison of Azkaban in the 5th book, and in the 7th book, in the scene of the Battle of Seven Potters, there are no signs of her being pregnant. On the other hand, despite the fact that Bellatrix was a participant of the events at the Astronomy Tower in the movie, we do not see her in the same scene in the book. However, she would definitely arrive at Hogwarts to support her nephew if she could. So, at some point in this time period, plus or minus a month, Delphine was born. But the fact that Delphi exists gives us many reasons. If Bellatrix got pregnant by the Dark Lord, then he had an attraction to women, and since he did not limit himself in violence a lot, he could very well conceive a bunch of children. In particular, Electa Carroll and Narcissa Malfoy were almost always nearby him. Therefore, the number of children is also not limited. So we have a chance to see some new variations of the similar events. Whether they will become obscurials, create horcruxes, or try to bring back to life their great father, one can only guess. But there is no doubt that they will bring new worries and dangers to the world. As a result, we have a great selection of the hypotheses, but perhaps someone of our viewers knows other theories about Voldemort. Write your guesses in the comments, and please share your opinion on what other character would you like to see in our next video. Do not forget to like and check the subscription to the channel, as well as make sure to press the magic bell to get notifications about the new videos on time. Thank you all for your attention and see you soon.